how many agents are actively operating in your environment was our poll question. So we've gotten some responses in already, but we'd love to keep them coming. But right now in the lead, and again, Will, Miguel, quick reaction it is, how many agents are actively operating in your environment? We know some, but not all of them. We generally don't know. There's some folks that say we know exactly, and I'm happy for you. If you know exactly how many agents, I think you're way ahead of the game. But maybe we'll start with you. Any surprise to this?
No, and not to start things off by throwing cold water, but I would imagine even the folks who know exactly and they're all governed, that may be untrue if you actually really, really dig in deep. I think especially when it comes to it, and I know we're going to get into this, the way the infrastructure for a lot of, consumer to business internet is set up today is really around, identity and fraud protocols that kind of break under a agentic future a little bit. And so, again, not to dissuade people who are feeling confident, but exactly is a strong word, I think. Miguel, I don't know if you feel differently.
No. Part of like the blame that I would do is not necessarily on human knowledge only, because Will, like you absolutely have a point, right? I think everything's moving so fast that you can't really know, quote unquote, exactly. I feel like at best you'll be at 90% certainty. But the other piece too is like everything, is convenient and everything's happening so fast. So even today, as we speak, right, you probably have an employee in your organization creating a new agent, right, or pushing out, a new agent that your team might not know anything about just yet, right? Now, it doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, but I think, I really like the answer of we know some, but not all of them, because I think we're going to be there for like a solid, like, a year, 2 years, maybe. Just because, that curve, right, of us kind of like really understanding awareness or like human awareness, like within an organization, it's going to take some time.
And I think, and that's the crux of this, right? Who is acting on your behalf? These are not experiments. This is live. These are in production, whether you know it or not. These agents are acting on behalf of your employee. They're acting on behalf of customers that are coming to your site. So they are completing purchases. They're making updates to credentials. They're doing authentications. Like they are actually in the driver's seat for a lot of use cases. And that infrastructure to govern all that was built for what? Humans. It wasn't really built for non-human identities. And so again, this is, some of the things we want to cover during today's session is where agents are already active across the ecosystems, both on the consumer and the workforce side, and the governance gaps that creates, as well as what identity architectures need to look like to actually govern this. And I think that's probably the hardest one that we probably will stick to a little bit. And then again, I missed the boat on this one, but I did not introduce our panelists, but we will get to that when I ask the first question on. Will, please introduce yourself before you do. But from your research at Liminal, you just mentioned that already a little bit. What is that single biggest misconception organizations have about AI agents and identity governance right now?
Yeah. So, well, Philip, thanks for having me. Will Charnley, Chief Operating Officer, Managing Director here at Liminal. So I work very closely with Philip. I think the biggest misconception, when we're out talking to buyers and a lot of folks in market is, even vendors, I think there's a thought that like someone else is going to figure this out, that there's going to be like a universal standards and frameworks. And I know we're going to talk about there's different ones out there. I don't think that's the case. And, I think there's a very strong appetite both within the workforce use cases, the back end use cases, and on the consumer side of things to deploy and rapidly use agents. And, if we're waiting for standards bodies and government bodies to kind of create the frameworks for us, I think that's a gross misconception of probably what's actually going to happen and what needs to happen to make this successful and as frictionless for everyone as it can be, for sure.
Yeah, and then Miguel, for you, again, same thing. Make sure you introduce yourself, which your host failed miserably at. Where does the AI agent governance rank as a priority for the organizations you work with, you work at, relative to other identity and security investments this year? Are you seeing an awareness, or are we still behind the ball on this?
Yeah, so for folks that don't know me, Miguel Navarro, I'm a innovator, patented inventor, seasoned digital leader, and fraud fighter. So again, kind of like all across the board when it comes to things that I do. And I would say speaking within like the banking industry, at least like when I'm talking to someone like the peers, et cetera, their investment, like this year, I think is a little bit more solid on not necessarily just AI projects, but really triggered more on creating pushing AI projects that show value on, what AI can do, or showing AI value. I think that's part of like the one thing that a lot of like folks are kind of like pushing for this year, at least like from all the different peers, et cetera, that I'm like talking to, and when it comes to what we do in our organization, this actually going to be a little bit more sensitive, if anything, because there's a lot of like things going on, so I can only talk in a generalized sense. But the one thing that I would say is, there's definitely leaders on our end, or at least like, let's call it like across like the banking industry as well. There's more focus now on positioning people as not having AI as a side gig, but more of like their main role. So I think 2026 is going to be, I think, the first year where people really not just say or talk AI. I think we've been hearing AI for like a very long time. But I think within like the banking industry, I've seen like a lot of roles open up when it's actually for AI and only that, right? Like it's not like a project manager that's like, oh, like you're kind of good at AI, so you do that too. No, it's like it's literally roles that they're opening up and truly investing in AI, which is what we should be doing.
I think exactly that. I mean, it's becoming mission critical where you can't. It's not just oh yeah, your role is X plus AI. It has to be, AI is core to our business, and if that's the case, then we have to have an AI team. I 100% agree with that. Yeah.
And I always tell people too, right? Like things are only going to be as serious as you take it. If you're saying, oh, I'm serious about it, but your actions don't show that you're serious about it, you're not going to get serious outputs. It's just that's just like how it is.
Put your money where your mouth is, right? That's yeah. So with that, let's put our money where our mouth is and go through some of these research stats that we've been talking about and thinking about. But Will, maybe take us away on this. We got a couple stats here. What are the key takeaways we want to get the audience to really focus on?
Yeah, and for those who don't know me, and part of my intro, my love language is slides. So I will try to run through these quickly to not dampen the conversation. But I think something just to frame the conversation here. So 3 big slides are showing up here. One is and I think the key is this is practical in use. This isn't hypothetical. This is what's actually happening. So 86% of the companies that we talk to are observing AI agents in consumer to commercial use cases. So, agents acting on the behalf of consumers. Now, transacting on the behalf of consumers, that still is lagging behind because there's a whole trust framework we have to make sure we get in there. But that means that today there are, agents acting on behalf of consumers, and we have to have a way to understand good versus bad agents on our sites. Second big stat, we left off the second part here, but 56% believe agentic AI will have the greatest impact in identity and fraud protocols. So that is a big consideration when we think about like the way we have traditionally set up identity protocols is around, hey, can we verify this person, this individual? Can we verify Will Charnley? That has to change. On the fraud side, the base layer of most every fraud program is this a bot? Yes. If bot, reject. That obviously has to change in an agentic future. And then this last stat, this stat, 40% of enterprise apps will include agents by 2026. This was actually from August. I think if we did this again today, that number would be dramatically higher. I actually think if you are, in this space and are not thinking about agents as a part of your product and you're selling software, I mean, that's what we saw with the SaaS apocalypse happen. I think like you definitely, that needs to be a part of every roadmap here. But Philip, Miguel, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think one of the things that's coming through here is you have the consumer agents and you have the workforce agents. So maybe Miguel, for you, are enterprise clients treating workforce and consumer agent governance as separate, as in like separate budgets, separate teams? Or is there a recognition that these have to converge or don't have to converge? I'd love to get your take into a single architecture problem. Are we going to monitor both on the same side, or are we going to set up multiple systems? And you feel, multiple system is what? Multiple failures. Poisoning the well here a little bit, but love to get your take.
No, and it's literally, I think, where like a lot of like the folks that I talk to in the industry, right, like is that, they definitely look at consumer AI differently, and there's like kind of like two positions on that, and then also workforce. So I'll start with the easier one. So especially within a highly regulated industry, workforce, agentic AI will probably be the easiest, because essentially you can layer that into what you are currently doing today. You're just doing it faster, right? Like, so it's very easy to apply human in the loop, human on the loop. And then so for folks that's not familiar, human in the loop would be essentially a human integrated on a day-to-day, right? Like as a process goes in, a human will need to like look at that. Human on the loop would be like it's autonomous, and then a human is just kind of like reviewing what is happening overall, and not necessarily a quote unquote approver. So I would say like human in the loop, approver, human on the loop, observability. So the one thing that, I would say is workforce, essentially people are just accelerating what it is that they're already doing, right? They're not necessarily creating anything new. It's just increase in velocity. Consumer is a little bit more tricky, so when it comes to, and again, I'm not talking for KeyBank, this is just more my observations with like all my conversations with my peers, et cetera, is that, when it comes to consumer AI, it's actually split into two. One is what is the bank doing for consumers, and then the second bit is what are consumers doing interacting with the bank using agentic AI agents. So is our organization ready for the AI, agentic AI, call it like channel, or interaction? So it's the same thing as the analogy that I would use for it is just like when the search engines first popped up, right? Like you have like, again, what's it, Lycos, like Alta Vista, you've got like Yahoo at the time. A lot of the internet.
How do you forget about Ask Jeeves, man?
Ask Jeeves, right? Like, so those search engines only really work on websites that have allowed for indexing and also at the same time there's like something that you put on your HTML page that allows it for easier access for search engines, right? Like, so you've allowed it to be search engine friendly so you can appear at the top. This is like pre-SEO, right? Like, so that's kind of like the world, right? Like that I'm trying to talk to some of like the other organizations is that, is your organization ready for consumers to interact with you using their AI agents? And, Philip, Will, like we've talked about this, I'm a huge component of, essentially having my AI agents do my stuff for me to interact with different companies. Like I honestly tell them to make phone calls, right? To create my doctor's appointment, create my vet appointment, do all of that. So I haven't done that in months, which is awesome. Like, but it also shows that, there's like folks that's ready for it or businesses that are ready for it from a human perspective. But from a system level, I don't know, right? I don't think so. Now, especially for like highly regulated industries, doing something, right, like what Chipotle did, right, like just like launching the chat and then all of a sudden like everyone interacting with their, Claude, we call it like Claude platform. It's very tricky for highly regulated industries to just release something, without being able to prove or through evidence just show to our regulators that things are being done in a particular way. Especially when there's just so much fluidity, let's call it fluidity, on like where things are going, AI wise, LLM wise, agentic wise, et cetera. But the One thing too that I'll kind of like point out, and maybe it'll help some of our audience out too, Philip and Will, is just like, I know there's like so many different definitions of agentic AI. Maybe let's touch point on that too. Like, how would you folks define agentic AI?
That's a great one. Before I answer that one, I'm going to check it in Claude. Use my agent to check it out, what he thinks it is. He or she thinks it is. But when Miguel mentioned the Chipotle example, the Chipotle, it had a chat function powered by Claude, and folks were smart enough to say, I'll take a burrito with all the toppings, and please, solve this really hard thing for me, and I'll use your compute power in your chatbot to do that. So that's what Miguel was talking about. I think for me, agentic AI, and Will, I'll let you go next, is for me, it's not just like typing in some prompts into the LLM and saying, hey, recap my email for me. It's really supplementing. It's becoming that digital version of your workforce that is saying, I can now do all of these multiple things by pressing a button and saying, like you said, schedule my appointments, do this, do that. It's connecting your life to that machine. It sounds really weird. Sound like I'm talking Terminator. Connect your life to that machine and have it do things on your behalf that you're instructing it to do. And that's my definition right now of agentic AI. But Will, I'd love to hear your take. And then also back to the stat on the page here, the 50%, 56% that believe agentic AI will have the greatest impact. Are they making investments in that governance, or are they winging it right now and just like trying to catch that wave?
A two-parter. All right, let's see if I can do it justice. Agentic AI, to me, I think there's a key piece, and that's like the autonomous nature, like the ability to do something autonomously. And I think the other piece is that it should be multi-step, like it's a multi-step process, right? So like asking a prompt and getting asking a question, getting an answer back to Claude is not multi-step. That's, and even the deep research tool is not multi-step. I think, if you think about what an agent, a human agent does, it can actually make decisions. So it can weigh pros and cons to make decisions. It can take actions. It can change to circumstances that might change. And it can continuously operate when you are not there. So if you're doing prompt AI, right, question, answer. It's not thinking after you leave like, oh, how could I have done that answer better, or, change. I think it has to have like that kind of continuous operation to be an agent. On the 56%, so we cut out the part, greatest impact in identity and fraud protocols. So I do think, yes, we are starting to see investment into the space, and Miguel would know better than me, but even, a lot of the banks I talk to are starting to like, hey, we need to actually understand, how to change the protocols around identity and fraud to do things like KYA, know your agent, et cetera. It's not like they're deploying systems now because, again, to Miguel's point, it's a regulated market. You can't just flip the switch and do that. I think where we have seen folks really start to weigh the investment is, I was talking to someone who buys solutions for identity and fraud the other day, and they said like, look, we have been saying for the last 18 months that, hey, we need all these AI tools because it will make us more efficient. But we're actually just spending a lot more money. And so finance is now coming to us to be like, hey, where are these efficiencies that you're supposed to point to? And I think like the money is going to come for solutions that can show that actual efficiency. Not that people are looking to replace, if you're a bank, every AML caseworker with a couple agents, but you have to be able to show like, what is the efficiency gain to actually, leverage these tools that, at scale become quite costly. And even with them being heavily subsidized by investors today. So, I think in order to capture the investment, you have to be able to show the efficiency gains is kind of my thought there.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that too, like with what Will mentioned, right? Like on greatest impact on essentially identity, and that's kind of like the one piece that I wanted to focus on, is that if you think about kind of like the art of the possibility and owning the responsibility. So the art of the possibility, I think everyone's there, right? Like, which is, hey, like, now, so you used to walk all the time, and now you have a car. So then now, like, us having the car. Hey, Will, like you and I are both on the East Coast, we can now drive to fill it. Where back in the day, like when people did caravans, et cetera, if you came in with 30 people and you got to like the West Coast from East Coast to West and took a month or whichever to like get there, you would essentially assess our KPIs and be like, okay, how many people died? Oh, only 5 people died. Oh, guys, that's totally acceptable. And, we were only robbed once, right? Wherein now, like, us like actually having the car, like you don't have to be robbed, right? Like, and it doesn't take a month. It's like, so now the possibility, where like before there was just zero possibility of us walking to, East Coast to West, because there's not really a lot of value there if the cost is walking. It's just not possible. And I think all the organizations are seeing like, oh, AI can do this, AI can do that, etc. But then now when we look at owning the responsibility piece of owning a car, you are going to have to pay for insurance. You are now susceptible to flat tires. You will have to do tire rotations. You would have to do oil changes. You now, have to, make sure that, you have to take through inspections. You have to buy gas. So again, there's a cost, right, to all the possibilities that's now ahead of you. And I think like when it comes to the biggest cost, I think in my head is like the identity piece becomes extremely important, because I think especially when agents are kind of just like acting on our behalf, I think there needs to be, a clear separation, and I'm not just talking about access, right? Because access and, being able to do privileged tasks, et cetera, like those are like totally one thing. But just us in the organization, for us to know exactly what everyone is doing, becomes a key point. And I'm looking at the number 86%, right? So 86% observe agents in commercial use today. How many of those actually have the correct identity foundation, et cetera? Because then if you think about it, if all of a sudden, it scales and there's now 2,000 agents in your organization that's kind of like running by itself, imagine how hard that would be to like pull all of that back if all of a sudden your team is kind of like late in the game and being able to identify a agentic AI identity framework. So then now you're going to have to reconstruct everything. Then now, people are going to look at it from an ROI perspective. If it's going to cost us, let's say for easy numbers, like 10 million, to, fix the identity issue, people are going to say, well, how much are every incident, right? Like it's almost like if every incident costs us like 250,000, why would we fix the identity issue that would cost us 12 million this year if we can anticipate that we're only going to spend 2.5 million in identity issues? But then again, that's not solving the problem, right? Like it's essentially that's how like companies end up crippling themselves as it becomes bigger. Like 5 years down the road, all of a sudden the 12 million is cheap compared to where they are 5 years later.
Yeah, listen, absolutely. I'm going to keep us moving now. We got a couple more interesting stats as well that I want to get to. But I like the analogy. Somebody last week told me as well, it's like we all had a bicycle and now we all have a Ferrari.
Yeah.
And we just don't know how to drive it. And hopefully you're wearing your seatbelt and hopefully you have insurance. So he went to the same path as you did about, the whole car analogy. But Will, here again, want to drop this in your lap here on these stats, since your love language is slides.
Yes. Yeah. Nice.
Give us some insights here.
Yeah. So I think like, where we're starting to see some of these, AI agents being deployed, it makes some sense, right? And we talked about the Chipotle example. That's a lot of that's like customer support, right? Customer support is replacing, kind of chat bots, which have historically been there, which are terrible for anyone who's ever used them, which is probably everyone here. And I think like can provide a much better experience. That's pretty low stakes, right? Low stakes there. I think when you start to get below that on this list, things become a little bit more gray area, right? Like account updates. That's usually a key area where fraud happens, right? Someone goes in and changes the information with a associated bank account. That's how things like money muling can occur, right? So that, high risk. Credential autofill, same thing. When we get down to purchases, there's a whole debate about, well, who holds liability in that case, right? Does the agent's not holding liability? Do the merchants hold liability like they do with card not present transactions? Do the card networks hold the liability? So, I think what we're seeing here is wide deployment, and I think there's still some questions left to be answered. Where it's being adopted, probably, not surprising to me that it's mid-market. Typically enterprises moving a little bit slower, right to be cautious, and SMB usually typically trails. But I do think there's some key areas here where, when we think about the associated risks, we probably need to have a good answer for it here for sure.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep us moving because I think the next slide, again, it hits really home what we've been talking about. So wanted to make sure that we get to that one. I got so many screens open, and I'm so concerned about my screen shrinking that I'm on all these screens. But I think this is the killer slide here. 82 machine identities to 1 human identity. Will,
yeah.
What the hell?
Yeah, and this is what we're seeing today. And I think, like, a year from now, that I don't know whether there's squares, rounded squares. There'll be many more compared to that 1 human identity. I do think, like, there is a kind of distinction to make, which is like, businesses have always managed, well, not all of them, but many have managed some traditional machine identities, things like API keys, service accounts, et cetera. What we're really, that's not what this slide is about. This is specific to, like, what we're seeing from an Agentic AI side of things. Where the risk, and for some reason, I got all the doom and gloom stats here that I'm talking about, but generally very optimistic. But there was a study that a company put out called Transmit Security, where they conducted their own analysis. I thought it was really interesting, and they actually found that agents today are able to, in many instances against fraud detection, like current defenses, act in a way that mimics human behavior close enough that traditional systems are not catching them. Things like CAPTCHA, things like bot detection, et cetera. And I think, like, what we've also seen in the stats here, 19% of, ATO attempts now involve agent-driven scams. I think that is pretty telling. And I think an area where we need to really think about how we're investing into the right infrastructure to ensure security, trust, all those things that, come along with creating a successful non-human layer of the internet, especially when it comes to commerce, for sure.
And then maybe, Miguel, a reaction from you on this one. On the agent-driven ATO, 19%. Again, I think if we run these like every quarter, I feel like this is like a hockey stick that we're going to see, just like more and more. But with that, are fraud and identity teams treating this as a fraud problem, an identity problem, or are they just like sitting around the table trying to figure this thing out while these account takeovers are happening?
Yeah, so it's very mixed, right? Like, because when I'm talking to some of my peers, a lot of them like run these on the rails that they have in their organization. So unfortunately, there isn't like a strategy today that all organizations should essentially like follow. That is tangible. I think everyone right now, like, and again, like talking about vendors, talking about consultants, etc. A lot of them are essentially, so it's almost just like you have a messy room and then everyone's like saying, oh, you should clean your room, right? So it's almost just like, yeah, no, like I totally get it that I need to clean my room, but can you give me like tangible instructions on how to properly clean and organize my room, right? Like, and unfortunately, like a lot of these folks just, I think I used this analogy before, is that there are people that's reading about riding the bicycle, and then there are people that are actually riding the bicycle, right? I think majority of like folks that are quote unquote helping organizations are like people that are reading about riding the bicycle because they don't go through the compliance requirements, the regulatory requirements, et cetera, like an organization that is like highly regulated goes through, right? Like most of these like consultants, do it through research, like, and, kind of like synthetic. And part of like the thing that, I do like is like when there are organizations that kind of like pick up like the things that they are learning within other organizations that are actually doing something But the one thing that, I would say is there's not really a structured strategy right now for a lot of like different banks and a lot of them would say that they do, but like honestly, like it's not set, and with the velocity of like how things are improving, it's just going to get worse, right? Like, so there's not really a fixed strategy that you can do. You're going to have to create a dynamic strategy and kind of go as you catch on. But the one thing, Philip, I think you and I have like talked about this in Identiverse last year. It's just like with every attempt, right? Like the fraudsters do, it always starts small because they're testing the systems, getting good, and then when they get to like a successful agent, right, that can like 90% or like 70% be successful in one organization, that's when the distribution network kind of goes into this flash sale of that tool. Because that's how like things are different now. It's just like it's literally people building kits, building all of these, call it like AI agents for fraud. Then essentially goes through this mass distribution because that person doesn't have to commit the fraud. They just need to test it and then sell it to the people that'll commit the fraud. And then all of a sudden you're trying to like herd cats, right? Like, so this 19% number, if that's happening, like right now, which I know it is because the research is coming from Liminal and a little bit of, push here for like Liminal and their research, it's awesome, right? Like, but the thing that I'll tell people is that if it's 19% right now, I would expect this, if not at the end of like 26, I would say like Q1, Q2 of like 27, that number is going to go like skyrocket.
Yeah, I don't think anybody disagrees with you on that. It's we always talk about it. It's super sophisticated, super cheap, and super scalable to be a fraudster now. And you can really hide yourself behind these tools. Like anyone can become a customer service rep for insert bank, insert e-commerce platform, and you wouldn't know. Voice clone, everything. But that's a lot of the negative stuff. Now, convergence, the convergence story here. Again, we're seeing a lot here, Will, about that. But what's your angle on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, what we're seeing across identity and fraud is a openness, willingness, appetite, and actually for the first time in a long time, an actual action step to start converging. There's always going to be a place for, I think, highly skilled point solutions to combat identity and fraud challenges. But like what we are seeing more and more is people do want to integrate systems, not just systems across like a customer lifecycle, but as this slide shows, like actually integrate what today is a lot of times like a workforce identity and access management solution over here, and then a customer one over here, and actually have them be able to talk together. Because if you think about it, the same platform that is governing, a human employee's access needs to govern a agentic employees access, a consumer's access, a consumer agentic access, and you can kind of understand how this all needs to be fitting together, and there needs to be similar protocols across an organization. This 95% expect to do it in 2 years. Let's come back in 2 years, and if this is the case, Philip, I'll buy you, I don't know, whatever you want. I think like this is probably where we're getting a little New Year's Eve effect of like, or New Year's resolution, right? Like, my goal is to eat healthier this year. Not going so well. So I think that's.
Well, you've been to Dunkin' this morning already? Is that what happened?
There's a little bit, there's a little bit of, intent versus, reality there. And I think like it's a good goal. I doubt it will be sitting here, 2 years from now and that will be achieved. But, I do think it is a strong signal that people do intend to move that way for sure.
Yeah,
Miguel, I'd love for your reaction on this. Is this happening, or is this just conversation?
Yeah, so I would say like I would share Will's sentiment on this, and I'll essentially mention what Will has been talking about, and I'll just call it the Mike Tyson effect, right? Everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. Like it's something very common that Mike Tyson always mentions. But the thing that I would say is it does feel that way, right? Like in a lot of the different industries that I do talk to, like even in the airline industry, like it feels like this is the year where like there's actual action happening, and it's it's really good and it's very refreshing, because it's gotten to like the point where I'm just so tired of like hearing people talk about something but then not do anything about it. But it definitely feels like the year because it's being backed up financially. It's being backed up by resources. A lot of like folks are being moved from their traditional roles to quote unquote AI roles. Companies are hiring, for AI, even in the security space. A lot of the conversations right now of agentic AI, call it like identity or IAM, like it's just like it's happening. So to me, I'm really hoping that within 2 years we do something, but I'm hoping that if we are late within like the 2 years, that it's because like we got punched in the face through like the planning and not the New Year's resolution, call it like process, which is just like like all gung ho like the first 2 months and then you kind of like disappear. But the thing that I would say here is like the 92. I absolutely agree with these numbers. But just like what Will had mentioned, this definitely feels like the year that people are moving forward to something actionable.
Makes total sense. In the interest of time, I'm going to keep us moving because we did say this governance gap we were going to talk about, and that was like a big deal. So we want to get to that right now. Here again, Will, I think I already said there's an important slide. That was the most important slide. I probably misspoke. I think this might be the most important slide in the deck. So again, hit us with some knowledge.
Yeah. So I think you kind of see on this slide, it is the, hey, what's happening today? And are we ready for what's happening today? And the answer is no. So 94% of the businesses we talk to are seeing non-human accounts today. That's great. I mean, it means that it's working, that things are growing. 60% cite compliance risk from unauthorized agentic access. Not good. That means that's nearly 2/3. And candidly, I think that's probably an under-reporting of what's actually happening. Just because, as Miguel said in the beginning, you can never be at 100%. We actually understand the issue. And then this last stat is probably, I got all the depressing stats. The most damning, I think, 10% have a mature management strategy for non-human identities. Just to unpack that a little bit more, when we actually get to what's happening in the other 90% here, 20% of folks are totally unprepared. So I think probably similar to that initial poll that we had up front is about, maybe a little bit higher, but around 20%. So they were totally unprepared. And 42% said that they lack a cohesive security strategy that is in place today. So, I think this is where, the time and the investment and the thought really needs to be put into place. Because, as Miguel said, fraudsters are already poking at those vulnerabilities. And once they find them, it's not a hole you can patch up. It becomes, the water's rushing in. So, I think while there's a lot to be excited about, there's a lot to figure out on the security side, on the fraud side, et cetera.
Yeah.
And Miguel, Miguel, for you, as you react to this, one of the questions I have for you is, so if there's something that does happen, unauthorized access by an agent is flagged. First of all, who's doing the flagging? And then secondly, who's doing the remediation? Is that the CISO team? The cybersecurity team? Is that the IT team? Is that the product team? Is that the legal team? Do we know who owns that flow? And is it because that ownership's not clear that we're kind of stuck, that folks feel like they're stuck?
Yeah, so I would say just like what I mentioned earlier, just the same as the strategy and what people are actioning on when it comes to agentic AI with every industry. It's just very mixed, it's just the approach is always what do they have in place now, and then how do they put this on that plate, right? That seems to be the majority of the answer that I'm getting. There's not necessarily creating a new foundation for AI. It's essentially still working on the same rails that we have. The one thing that, I would say, especially with this slide, right? And I think this slide hits it as well. Let's remove the topic of agentic AI for a second. Let's remove that topic and just like focus on non-human identities, or, for folks that don't like the term non-human, like machine identities, right? Like, so if we just focus on that, and if you think about that in your organization today without agentic AI, et cetera, is that a problem today? Right? Like a lot of like organizations would probably say yes, because they're still like working on some of the vulnerabilities that they had, right? Like, or that's continuous work. Now toss in the nitroglycerine of, like agentic AI into the mix, then it's a huge freaking problem, right? Like, so that's kind of like the thing that, I'm telling people is that, when you're looking at an organization, and again, if you're a organization that has like unlimited funds, et cetera, it makes sense, right? That when you have a existing problem and people are fixing it, et cetera, and then now you have a call it like a problem on the horizon or at your doorstep, depending on like, how fast you adapt and evolve as an organization. It's almost just like, do you just grab the team that's already worked to the bone, like on like, non-human identities, and then tell them, hey guys, we're going to add this responsibility to you guys, and we think that that's amazing strategy. No, it's a horrible strategy. Like the thing is, it's just like those people are already working on something very crucial, and that's like non-AI related. Now you're going to send work, right, on agentic AI identities to folks and treat it like the same as non-human identities. These are, and I hate calling it this, but I'm still going to, which is essentially like a lot of agentic AI, right, has this organic matter. And what I mean by that is and I think I've shared this, Philip and Will, like, so I run multi-instances of OpenClaw. I don't know, for the most part, like what my OpenClaw is opening as far as accounts until I get that briefing at the, in the morning, that it will like tell me, hey, I opened this account. I, essentially signed us up for this because my agent has an email address, has a phone number. There's a literal phone like attached to every MacBook. I mean, like Mac Mini that I have in a Mac Studio. Like I have like phones attached to them. Like I treat them like an actual organization in person, right? So the thing is it's like it's not the same as quote unquote non-human identities, and I'm sure that there are people that will argue that, and I'm totally fine with that because everyone's entitled to their opinion. My opinion is, because I'm the guest of like this webinar that you have on, is that I think that it's a much bigger problem than non-human identities. I think there's a piece here that, especially as you mature, in your agentic AI piece, especially like let's call it like the use case of, call it like a service desk or whichever, right? Let's say a new employee comes in and you're like, hey, I'm onboarding this new employee. The expectation that we have, especially for agentic AI agents, is, oh, it's going to open up tickets in ServiceNow. It's going to, essentially grab like a PC, like set for delivery at this address, et cetera, right? Like it's just like autonomous. It'll like follow the onboarding flow for that, like particular, it'll go through like, call it like your workday, like open up like, and, create a box for that person, get approval, et cetera. There's probably going to be an agent that will approve that because it's agent on agent communication. But the idea there is it's not the same as non-human identity that has like that, just like what Will mentioned, it's a single turn task, right? Like of like doing something, or if there are ones that's a little bit more complicated, that's multi-turn, yes, but it's still within like a structured domain. Like when you talk about agentic AI, there's so much fluidity to it, and it's not the same as the non-human identity issue. I think it's another thing.
Well, before we move on to the next slide, do you think there's also a skill problem in organizations? Now, just what Miguel said, hey, these folks are working already on these very complicated topics. Now, having them open up their mind to do this other thing, do you feel there's enough skill inside organizations to handle this?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is a kind of, it's not necessarily a total retraining, but there needs, a lot of, I think, what organizations have done is said like, hey, there are these tools and this is some of what we're facing. Now go handle this. Now go solve this. I think like there's a lot of pressure on, employees within organizations to be very fluent in their own AI tooling, just by default. And I think, we see high variability between folks who are able to use tools effectively and not effectively there. And I think like, just generally, agentic AI, when it comes to, particularly like where these, compliance risks exist, et cetera, like it's a totally different solution that you need to solve for that. We're using, the same technologies we have to determine, human, non-human, to now try to determine human, non-human good, non-human bad, which I think a lot of the current technologies aren't necessarily equipped to handle that today. So I think there's there's probably it's a training piece, but also a technology piece, like having the right tools, right? You can have all the training in the world, but if you don't have the right tools, you can't do anything with it.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, one more slide, and then we're gonna cut our. We have a bunch more slides, but obviously, your moderator stinks at getting the conversation moving forward. But hopefully, you all got some interesting insight already. But again, Will, going back to you one more time. These are some wild stats that we have here. Walk us through them.
Yeah. So, I think like there's 3 stats here, but they all kind of point to the same. Some of the same challenges. So the first one, I'm going to not go top to bottom here, but is around the idea of fragmentation. So, we've talked about unification. We've talked about platforms. Overwhelmingly, people point to it and say, like, great idea. So 79% of the buyers we talk to prefer unified platforms, want to move that way. But over half of them still use 3+ vendors. That actually got a little cut off. It's 3+ vendors within a particular part of a customer journey. So they're using 3+ vendors for customer onboarding, 3+ vendors for transaction monitoring, 3+ vendors for ongoing session monitoring, potentially authentication, ongoing engagement. So these stacks are very complex. They're not necessarily talking to each other. 87% experienced 2+ identity related breaches in the past year. I think you can unpack this a little bit, which I think, there's multiple vulnerabilities here. You have systems that are vulnerable to back-end attacks, cybersecurity attacks. That is certainly happening at scale. And then you also have a lot of security risks on the front end. Complicating this is a lot of times the front end and back end, they don't talk to each other, right? The cyber team and the fraud team aren't necessarily integrated to solve this as well. And what this kind of leads to, we have it here, 500% is the projected increase in fraud losses from AI agent-driven detection failures. That is a massive, massive number. I think to Miguel's point, a couple slides ago, we saw it's 19% of ATO cases. I mean, if you take that at scale, this is going to be the leading driver for fraud losses across the board. So I think there is this architectural problem, which is, how to better integrate systems to communicate, and how to better integrate also, Miguel, I love you call yourself you're a fraud fighter. How to integrate fraud fighters across networks? Because I can tell you, fraudsters are very good at cooperating and sharing, best practices and working within a network effect. That's, I won't speak for Miguel, but as a fellow fraud fighter, I don't think we're necessarily as good enough. We're not as good as they are at kind of sharing that knowledge and kind of creating network effects on fighting the fraud that we're seeing.
Yeah, Miguel, let you talk for you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, so to me, like, I definitely think that the 500%, and again, I'm not necessarily sure how the 500% was calculated, but at least like in my eyes, I feel like the 500% might be under forecasted. Only because I think from the technology perspective and the velocity perspective, I think the 500% is on point. Like when it comes to, agentic AI driven fraud, and how people are going to execute on that. But the issue is there's also these like compliance and regulatory things going on, globally, right? Like, so if you think about kind of like the shared liability that's going on right now with the UK of, so here in the US, right? Like when you're a bank and fraud happens, the first question you ask is, am I liable, right? Like, do I need to pay out? And that's essentially like where, like most organizations have like, fraud dollars set aside that, like essentially it's their cushion, it's their threshold. So the idea here is that, okay, so it's 500% like based off of existing things today. But what happens, right, when you now have like shared liability, that every single fraud is now money, out of pocket, right? Like a financial institution will have to pay out. Because today, like when fraud happens, right, and it's not necessarily like like a bank isn't necessarily liable for it, they don't lose dollars. But now if you're going to have to pay out every single fraud and it's, like you essentially split it with, every single financial institution or whichever, I mean, that's going to change, right? Like, so if you look at kind of like CPRA, et cetera, like, or, where it all started as, something like, I think it's, I forget like like how they did it in like Europe at the time, but again, like we now have CPRA because of like some of those like compliance and regulatory stuff that happened within data somewhere else outside of the United States, let's just say that. So to me, I think the 500 number, 500% might be a little on the lower side as far as like my estimates go, but I definitely think that there is going to be an issue if people aren't able to catch it, because as a fraud fighter, right, the most important thing for us is signals. If the signals today look, and we're not prepared for it, right? Like, and I think Will, Philip, you folks mentioned it earlier, like CAPTCHA, et cetera. So even like today, right, like when we're detecting all the things that's going on, like in the digital ecosystem, essentially like, so like, let's say Shape SDK, right? Like essentially you're trying to figure out, is a bot like trying to like log in? Like that might be a bad thing yesterday, but that's essentially productivity today. Like I literally, again, just like what I mentioned, I have like so many different agents, like kind of doing like a whole bunch of different things. And I guarantee you a bunch of them, they're not logging onto my account. Obviously they have their own account because, I kind of like structured my identities differently. But that's kind of like the thing that, there's going to be a bunch of like folks that's essentially going to leave their, credentials on a markdown file or, a notepad file, right? That they're going to hand it as a note, into their agent's notebook, et cetera. So number one, when you're looking at security, is every single consumer like in the world trained, with a security mindset? The answer is no. That's the reason why fraud is thriving. If you look at fraud year over year, I don't think there's been like an instance where like fraud has not increased like from the year prior, right? So from a scoreboard perspective, like fraudsters are doing better than the Chicago Bulls doing the three-peat, right? Like, so again, like they're intense and they're like succeeding at like a alarming rate. So that's the reason why, like, to me, all the stuff that's going through like non-human IDs, and then all the things that's going to be into the mix of agentic AI, of the things that we know about and we don't know about. And again, the world of we don't know about is much larger than the world we know. That's the reason why, like, I think the 500% might be a little under forecasted.
Awesome. With that, we're about 3 minutes away from the end. We will share these slides with our attendees. Again, my error, because we just got into the conversation.
The conversation was too good. That's a good thing. I
know. I thought it was really compelling as well. So, in the last couple of minutes, we do have some time for Q&A. We have some questions in here. So one of the questions we have is, do you expect AI agents to remain primarily linked to human identities and delegated access models, or evolve towards agent-to-agent chains, agents acting on behalf of other agents, so ad nauseum, requiring entirely new authentication frameworks, but beyond today's IAM and risk models? Miguel, maybe real quick.
Yeah, like, so I would say, like, from a workforce perspective, I think that they're still going to link it to human identities, because I think from a responsibility perspective, I think that's from everyone that I'm like talking to, I think the strategy is they still want it linked to the person performing the action, because that person will still act as an approver. And again, that may change tomorrow. But with all the conversations that I'm having, it's still there from a workforce perspective. From a consumer perspective, though, especially like just like what I mentioned in some of like my different experiences, I do think that it's going to have its own identity. I think how consumers are going to use it and how workforce is looking at it are going to be two completely different pictures.
Got it. And Will, I know we put you all on the doom and gloom stats. Maybe take us away with one, finish us up with a positive. What is the positive that you're seeing on this consumer and workforce agent?
Yeah, I do. On the workforce side of things, I do think the ability to increase productivity and to actually increase faster decisions when it comes to preventing compliance risk, preventing fraud risk, et cetera. Like I do think there are meaningful gains to be had there. If you think about the amount of time spent on manual reviews, on case management, et cetera, like I think agents can have a really big impact in that space. Just to be very specific, one space I'm really looking at in particular is like AML transaction monitoring, which historically has been let's catch money launderers and terrorists and drug cartels by looking backward at transactions. Harder to do to catch someone. I think like there's a lot that can be done to be a lot more proactive, leveraging agents and the speed at which they can work. That's going to make the world a better place. If you take care of money laundering. So I am very excited. I think there's a lot to be gained there, and I do think the upside for even agentic commerce is massive when you think about its ability to actually create better decisions for consumers. So it's not all doom and gloom. I generally very optimistic, but we have to do it in a smart and intelligent way as well, for sure.
And then Miguel, maybe last take from you on the consumer side, which you've been dabbling in a lot, obviously. To convince people, why should they do this?
Yeah, so one of the things that I was alluding to earlier was like reading about riding a bike and riding a bike, right? Like, so one of like the things that I tell people is you don't learn about riding the bike by reading about riding the bike. You can't be an expert in riding the bike by reading more about the bike. Just sometimes you just have to like drop everything, get on the bike, take a couple of falls, and go, and learn. Because the thing is that especially like fraud fighters, right? And let's think about it that way. A person, right, like who doesn't necessarily know how a fraudster thinks might not be quite an effective fraud fighter. Because the thing is like, so if you think about sparring or like boxing or whatever martial arts like people are like thinking of, if you don't know the punch or kick that's coming towards you, then how can you defend from it? So to me, the reason why I want people to like, again, like a lot of like people are saying, hey, like, like you shouldn't do open claw at work. Okay, then don't do it at work. Buy your own, go out there, go get your own Mac Mini, or grab an old laptop that you have, run an instance of open claw and try to like create like fraudster tactics and just really see like how powerful that is. Because the thing is like, if you're just going to read about it, then you're just reacting to the news. Like the thing is like you have to be at the forefront because everyone is like, and that's the new standard of like where you should be. So to me, I truly think people should stop reading about riding the bike and just buy a bike, get on one, and start learning.
Awesome. With that, thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Will. Thank you, Miguel, for joining the conversation. I had a great time. I learned a lot. So hopefully that reflected to the audience as well. As I mentioned, we're happy to share the slides. If you have more questions that we did not answer, we will get back to you on those. And feel free to reach out to us at any time. Again, at this point, thank you so much, everyone, and we'll catch you later.